The black stallion reared against the rope, his hooves cutting through the morning air like twin daggers as Cordelia Thorne stepped back, her heart hammering against her ribs. Blood trickled from the fresh cut on her palm where the rope had burned, through her leather gloves, but she refused to let go. Not today. Not when half the town had gathered at dawn to watch her fail. "Told you that devil horse ain't meant for riding," called out Jeremiah Polk from the fence rail, tobacco juice darkening the dust at his boots. "Your daddy should have put a bullet in him months ago." Cordelia's emerald eyes blazed with fury as she tightened her grip. Thunder, named for the sound his hooves made when he charged, had arrived at their ranch 3 months ago. Wild as the Colorado winds and twice as dangerous. Every man in Willowbrook had tried to break him. Every single one had ended up in the dirt, nursing bruised ribs and wounded pride. "No man can break this stallion," she had declared yesterday at the general store, her voice carrying across the assembled crowd like a battle cry. "But I will." Now, as Thunder's massive frame trembled with barely contained rage, she wondered if her pride would be the death of her. The stallion's coat gleamed like polished obsidian in the golden sunrise, and his dark eyes held an intelligence that made her skin crawl as if he could see straight through to her soul and found her wanting. "Easy, boy," she whispered, taking a tentative step forward. "I'm not here to hurt you." Thunder snorted, his breath forming small clouds in the crisp morning air. Behind her, she could hear the murmur of the growing crowd. Word had spread quickly through the small settlement that Cordelia Thorne, the stubborn daughter of the deceased ranch owner, was attempting what no man had managed. The rope in her hand suddenly went slack, and her stomach dropped. Stopped fighting. He stood perfectly still, his massive head lowered, watching her with those unnervingly intelligent eyes. This was either surrender or the calm before the storm. Then she heard the soft scrape of spurs against dirt, approaching from behind the crowd. The murmuring died away, as if someone had thrown a blanket over the gathering. Cordelia didn't dare turn around, but she felt the weight of a new presence, heavy and commanding as a storm cloud. "Yes," came a voice like whiskey and smoke. "You're holding that rope all wrong." The stranger's words cut through the morning silence with an authority that made even Thunder's ears prick forward. Cordelia's breath caught in her throat. She had lived in Willowbrook her entire 22 years, knew every voice, every face, every story. This voice belonged to no one she recognized. "Step aside," the stranger continued, his boots moving closer, "before that animal decides you're more trouble than you're worth." Thunder's head shot up, nostrils flaring as he caught the newcomer's scent. For the first time since arriving at the ranch, the stallion looked genuinely concerned. Cordelia's spine stiffened at the stranger's presumptuous tone. But she didn't turn around. "I don't recall asking for your help, mister." A low chuckle rumbled. Behind her, rich and infuriating. "No, I reckon you didn't. But that stallion's about 2 seconds from deciding whether to trample you or bolt. Neither option ends well for you." Thunder took a step backward, his powerful muscles coiling beneath his midnight coat. The stallion's gaze had shifted entirely from Cordelia to the man behind her, and something like recognition flickered in those dark eyes. "He knows you," Cordelia breathed, finally risking a glance over her shoulder. The stranger stood apart from the crowd, and she understood immediately why the townspeople had fallen silent. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of storm clouds. A black hat sat low on his brow, casting shadows that made his angular face seem carved from granite. Everything about him spoke of danger from the well-worn Colt at his hip to the way he moved with predatory grace. "We've met," he said simply, his gaze never leaving Thunder. "Haven't we, boy?" The stallion whinnied not the angry, defiant sound Cordelia had grown accustomed to, but something softer, almost ... yearning. Thunder took another step back, but this time it wasn't retreat, it was invitation. "Who are you?" Cordelia demanded. Though she found herself whispering, something about this moment felt sacred, dangerous, like standing too close to lightning. "Name's Kavanaugh, Ryder Kavanaugh," touched the brim of his hat with 2 fingers. "And you're Cordelia Thorne, stubborn as a mule?" And twice as pretty? Heat flooded her cheeks, but she lifted her chin defiantly. Flattery won't make me step aside. Hey, this is my horse, my ranch, your funeral. If you keep holding that rope like you're trying to strangle it. Ryder moved past her with fluid motion, his hand extended toward Thunder. Easy does it, old friend. I know you remember me. Thunder's entire demeanor changed. The wild, barely controlled fury melted away, replaced by something Cordelia had never seen in the stallion's eyes. Trust. The massive horse stepped forward and nuzzled Ryder's outstretched palm, rumbling sound emanating from deep in his chest. The crowd erupted in whispers. Jeremiah Polk's jaw hung open so wide a sparrow could have nested there.
Ow.
Cordelia's voice cracked with disbelief. Ryder's fingers traced the white star on Thunder's forehead with gentle reverence. I raised him from a colt, trained him. Before, double quotes, his expression darkening, before he was stolen from me 2 years ago. The rope fell from Cordelia's numb fingers. Stolen. It's by a man named Vance Murdoch and his gang. They hit my ranch in Montana, killed my partner, took everything that wasn't nailed down. Ryder's voice remained steady, but his eyes held a coldness. That made Cordelia shiver. I've been tracking them ever since. Thunder pressed his great head against Ryder's chest, and the cowboy's hard expression softened momentarily.
I never expected to find you here, boy. Figured Murdoch would have sold you by now or worse.
Mr. Henderson sold him to my father 3 months ago, Cordelia said slowly, pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. He said the horse came from a traveling trader, but Henderson never was much for asking questions when the price was right. Ryder scratched Thunder behind the ears, earning a contented snort. Murdoch must have passed through, needed quick cash. The morning sun climbed higher, painting the scene in shades of gold and amber. Around them the crowd began to disperse. Sensing the show was over, Cordelia couldn't move, couldn't tear her gaze away from the impossible sight of Thunder acting like a gentle lamb. So what happens now? She asked, though she dreaded the answer. Ryder's storm-gray eyes met hers, and she felt something shift in the air between them. Inevitable. Now, he said quietly, I reckon we have ourselves a problem. Problem, Cordelia's? Voice rose an octave. The only problem here is you waltzing onto my property and claiming my horse. Ryder's mouth quirked up at one corner, transforming his stern features into something devastatingly handsome. Your horse, Miss Thorne? I've got papers back in my saddlebags that say different. Thunder whickered and nudged Ryder's shoulder, as if agreeing with his former master. The betrayal stung worse than Cordelia expected. For 3 months she'd been the only person who hadn't given up on the stallion. It's the only one who believed he could be more than a beautiful destroyer of men's pride. Papers can be forged, she said, crossing her arms. And even if they're real, possession is 9/10 of the law. Thunder's been on my property for months. My father paid good money for him. Money that was payment for stolen goods. Ryder's tone remained maddeningly calm. But I'm not unreasonable, Miss Thorne. Your father was an innocent party in this. He shouldn't suffer for Murdoch's crimes. Hope flickered in her chest. You'll let me keep him? I'll buy him back. Name your price. The hope died as quickly as it had been born. He's not for sale. Everything's for sale, ma'am. Just a matter of finding the right number. Cordelia stepped closer, her chin tilted at a stubborn angle. There isn't enough money in all of Colorado to make me sell Thunder. He's not just a horse to me, he's all I have left. Something shifted in Ryder's expression, the hard edges softening slightly. Your father? Died 4 months ago. Heart gave out during the spring roundup. The words still tasted bitter on her tongue. The bank's been circling like vultures ever since. They'll foreclose by winter if I can't make the payments. Thunder sensed the tension and stepped between them, his great head swiveling from Cordelia to Ryder, as if trying to solve an impossible puzzle. Ryder's hand continued its rhythmic stroking along the stallion's neck, but his eyes remained fixed on Cordelia's face. You planning to break him to saddle to save your ranch? He asked quietly. I was going to try. She lifted her chin higher. Before you showed up, Thunder's never taken a saddle. Never will either. Not the way you were going about it. Ryder paused, seeming to wrestle with some internal decision. But there might be another way. I'm listening. A wager. The words hung in the morning air like smoke. You and me, winner takes thunder. Cordelia's heart began to race. What kind of wager? A race? Sunset tomorrow. We both ride bareback. From here to Devil's Canyon and back. First one to cross the finish line wins. Ryder's smile held a dangerous edge. You win. Thunder's yours free and clear, and I'll throw in enough gold to pay off your bank for good measure. The offer was too good to be true, which meant there had to be a catch. If you win, I take Thunder, and you come with me. Words hit her like a physical blow. Come with you where? Wherever the trail leads. I'm still hunting Murdoch and his gang. Ryder's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more weight than a shout. I could use a partner who knows the territory. Someone who can ride and shoot and isn't afraid of a fight. You're asking me to abandon my ranch, my life, everything I've ever known, for a horse? I'm asking you to trust me. He stepped closer, and she caught the scent of leather and sage and something indefinably masculine. One race, Cordelia? Winner. Takes all? She should say no. Any sane woman would say no. But as she looked into Ryder's storm-gray eyes, she felt something wild and reckless unfurling in her chest, the same feeling she got when Thunder ran free in the pasture. Power. In grace and untamed beauty. What horse will you ride? She asked. The bay gelding I rode into town. He's fast, but not as fast as Thunder. Ryder's smile widened. Of course, that won't matter much if you can't stay on Thunder's back long enough to reach the canyon. The challenge, in his voice, made her blood sing. She'd been making impossible choices. Her whole life fighting to keep the ranch running after her mother died, nursing her father through his final illness, standing up to men who thought a woman had no business, owning property. This was just one more impossible choice. You have yourself a wager, Mr. Kavanaugh, she said, extending her hand. May the best rider win. His fingers closed around hers, warm and calloused and somehow perfect. May the best rider win. The news of the wager spread through Willowbrook, like wildfire in dry grass. By midday, half the county had heard about the race between the mysterious stranger and Cordelia Thorne. By evening, betting pools had formed in every saloon, general store, and parlor, from the township to the mining camps in the hills. Cordelia spent the afternoon in Thunder's stall, talking to him in low, urgent tones, while she worked oil into his coat until it gleamed like black silk. The stallion listened with pricked ears, occasionally snorting or stamping as if offering his own opinions on the situation. I know you remember him, she murmured, running her hands along Thunder's powerful neck. I can see it in your eyes. But you're mine now, understand? You've got a ranch to save and a point to prove. Thunder nuzzled her shoulder, his breath warm against her neck. For 3 months, this had been their ritual, her speaking her fears and dreams aloud, while he listened with the patience of a priest hearing confession. It was the closest thing to conversation she'd had since her father died. Miss Thorne? Spun around to find Ryder standing in the barn doorway, his broad frame silhouetted against the dying sunlight. He'd removed his hat, revealing thick dark hair that caught the golden light. Without the shadow across his features, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the small scar that curved along his left temple. Come to try and talk me out of the race? She asked, not moving away from Thunder's side. Came to make sure. You understand what you're getting into. He stepped into the barn, his spurs chiming softly against the wooden floor. Devil's Canyon's a hard ride even for experienced riders. The trail's narrow, rocky, with a drop-off that'll kill you if you take a wrong step. I've ridden to Devil's Canyon before. Not bareback. Not on a stallion who's never carried a rider. Ryder moved closer, close enough that she could see flecks of silver in his gray eyes. It's not too late to call this off, Cordelia. There are other ways to settle this. Something in his voice made her pulse quicken, such as, I could stay, help you run the ranch, fight off the bank. His hand came up to rest on Thunder's neck, just inches from hers. We could share him. The offer was tempting, more tempting than it had any right to be. But Cordelia had learned long ago that nothing worthwhile came without a price. And men like Ryder Kavanaugh always extracted payment eventually. And when you get tired of playing rancher, when the trail calls you back, she shook her head. Won't be anyone's temporary arrangement, Mr. Kavanaugh, Ryder, he corrected softly. And who says it would be temporary? Because men like you don't settle down. You're like thunder, beautiful, dangerous, and wild. The moment someone tries to fence you in, you'll break free and run. She stepped away from the stallion, putting distance between herself and the cowboy who made her forget all her carefully constructed defenses. I'd rather lose the race than spend my life waiting for you to leave. Something flickered across Ryder's features, hurt, perhaps, or recognition. You don't know anything about me. I know enough. You've been hunting the men who wronged you. For 2 years, that's not justice. Ryder, that's obsession. And obsessed men don't make good partners, in business or otherwise. Thunder shifted restlessly between them, sensing the tension in the air. Ryder's jaw tightened, and for a moment Cordelia thought he might argue. Instead, he settled his hat back on his head and touched the brim in a gesture that was becoming familiar. Reckon we'll find out tomorrow who's right, he said quietly. Sunrise, Miss Thorne. Don't be late. He turned and walked away, leaving Cordelia alone with Thunder and the growing certainty that she'd just made either the smartest or stupidest decision of her life. That night, she lay awake listening to the wind howl across the prairie and imagining all the ways the race could go wrong. She could fall and break her neck. Thunder could throw her and run back to Ryder. The bank could foreclose while she was off playing games with dangerous strangers. But beneath the fear was something else, singing in her blood that she hadn't felt since she was a child, racing. Her father's horses across the open range with her hair streaming behind her like a banner. She'd forgotten what it felt like to truly risk everything, to live in the moment when anything seemed possible. Tomorrow. She would find out if she was brave enough to grab hold of that feeling and never let go. Dawn broke gray and cold over Willowbrook, painting the sky in shades of pewter and rose. Cordelia had been awake for hours, her stomach too twisted with nerves to allow for sleep. She'd braided her long auburn hair and secured it with leather ties. Then dressed in her father's old riding clothes canvas pants, a cotton shirt, and boots worn soft with age, Thunder seemed to sense the importance of the day. He stood perfectly still as she led him from the barn, his dark coat rippling with barely contained energy. The townspeople had begun gathering before sunrise, lining the makeshift starting line that stretched from the Thorne Ranch gate to the old oak tree that marked the official beginning of the racecourse. Ryder was already there, seated atop a blood bay gelding that danced sideways with excitement. He'd exchanged his black hat for a battered brown one, and his gray eyes found hers across the crowd with laser intensity. "Riders ready?" called out Judge Morrison, the town's unofficial arbiter of disputes and friendly wagers. He held a worn pocket watch in one hand and a red bandana in the other. Cordelia swung herself onto Thunder's back in one fluid motion, ignoring the gasps from the crowd. The stallion's muscles tensed beneath her, but he didn't buck or bolt. Instead, he stood statue still, waiting for her signal. She could feel his power thrumming through his body like electricity, ready to explode into motion at her command. "Easy, boy," she whispered, leaning forward to stroke his neck. Da 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 da. Well, Choge said, "Wording, Ford, this art moment. Don't let me down." Thunder's ears flicked back toward her voice, and she felt him relax slightly. Across the starting line, Ryder sat his gelding with the easy grace of a man born to the saddle. His mouth was set in a grim line, but his eyes held something that might have been admiration. "Course runs from here to Devil's Canyon and back," Judge Morrison announced to the crowd. "First rider to cross the finish line wins. No weapons, no interference, just skill and horseflesh." He raised the bandana high above his head. "Riders, ... ready." Cordelia's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it, everything she'd worked for, everything she'd dreamed of, balanced on the edge of a horse race. Win, and she'd save her ranch and prove that Thunder belonged with her. Lose, and she'd forfeit both the stallion and her freedom to a man whose motives remained as mysterious as morning mist. Set. Thunder gathered himself beneath her, every muscle coiled like a spring. She could feel his anticipation matching her own, his wild heart beating in rhythm with hers. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. Go. The bandana dropped, and Thunder exploded forward like a cannon shot. The power of his acceleration nearly unseated Cordelia, but she locked her legs around his barrel and held on as the world blurred into a rush of wind and pounding hooves. Behind them, she could hear riders gelding matching their pace, the bay's lighter hoofbeats drumming a counterpoint to Thunder's bass rhythm. The crowd's cheers faded quickly as the two horses stretched out across the prairie, eating up ground with ground-covering strides. Thunder ran like he'd been born for this moment, his massive frame moving with a fluid grace that took Cordelia's breath away. She'd never felt anything like it. The raw power of the stallion combined with her own desperate need to win created a kind of magic that made her feel invincible. They reached the first Marquera weathered fence post that marked the halfway point to Devil's Canyon, with riders gelding running neck and neck beside them. The cowboy sat his horse like he was part of the animal, moving with the bay's rhythm as if they shared one mind. His gray eyes met hers for an instant, and she saw something there that made her pulse race even faster than Thunder's gallop. Respect, challenge, and something deeper. More dangerous, a connection that had nothing to do with horses or wagers, and everything to do with the wild beating of two hearts that refused to be tamed. The canyon loomed ahead, its red walls rising from the prairie like the broken bones of some ancient giant. The trail narrowed as they approached, forcing the horses to run single file along the rocky path that wound between towering stone formations. Thunder took the lead, his sure feet finding purchase on the treacherous footing where a less experienced horse might stumble. Behind them, Cordelia could hear the bay's breathing grow labored as the pace and terrain took their toll. They were going to win. She could feel it in Thunder's stride, see it in the way the stallion's ears pricked forward. As the canyon's end came into view, all they had to do was make the turn and race back to Willowbrook, and the ranch would be saved. That was when she heard the sound that chilled her blood, the crack of a rifle echoing off the canyon walls. Thunder stumbled as the rifle crack echoed. Through the canyon, his hooves scrambling for purchase on the rocky trail, Cordelia felt him gather himself and surge forward again, but her blood had gone cold with recognition. She'd heard that particular rifle before, a fancy Winchester, with a distinctive sharp report that belonged to only one man in the territory, Vance. Murdoch, Cordelia. Ryder's voice boomed behind her, harsh with urgency. Get down! She flattened herself against Thunder's neck just as another shot rang out, the bullet whining off the canyon wall inches from her head. Stone chips scattered like deadly rain, and Thunder's eyes rolled white with terror. But the stallion didn't. Bolt instead seemed to understand the danger and began weaving along the trail with the cunning of a wild mustang avoiding predators. The bay gelding drew alongside them as the trail widened again, Ryder's face grim as granite. How many? He shouted over the thunder of hooves. I only see muzzle flashes from two positions, Cordelia called back, her eyes scanning the canyon rim above them. But Murdoch never travels with less than 4 men. You know Murdoch? Ryder's voice cracked like a whip. He's been trying to buy out the small ranchers for months. When talk didn't work, he started using bullets. Another shot rang out, this one closer. My father refused to sell. A week later, his horse threw him during roundup. Funny thing about that, horse it had never thrown anyone in 15 years. Ryder's expression turned murderous. Son of a... The crack of multiple rifles cut him off, and suddenly the air around them filled with lead. Thunder screamed not in pain but in rage and launched himself forward with renewed fury. Cordelia had to lock her fingers in his mane to keep from sliding off as they careened around a sharp bend in the trail. There, which pointed ahead to where the canyon opened onto the prairie. If we can reach open ground... We won't make it, Ryder interrupted, pulling a Colt from his holster. They've got the exit covered. Look, 2 more men had positioned themselves at the canyon mouth, their rifles trained on the narrow opening. It was a perfect trap nowhere. To run, nowhere to hide, and no way out except through a hail of bullets. Thunder seemed to sense the trap too. The stallion slowed to a walk, his great head turning from side to side as he searched for an escape route. Behind them, Cordelia could hear boots scrambling down the canyon walls as Murdoch's men moved to close the noose. "Ryder Kavanaugh," the voice echoed off the stone walls, smooth as snake oil and twice as poisonous. "Been looking for you for 2 years, boy. Time to settle accounts." Vance Murdoch stepped into view on a ledge 20 feet above them, his rifle trained on Ryder's chest. He was a tall, lean man with silver hair and cold blue eyes, dressed in a fine suit that looked absurdly out of place in the rugged canyon. But the gun in his hands was deadly serious. "Murdoch," Ryder's voice carried. No fear, only a cold fury that made Cordelia shiver. "Figured you'd crawl out from under your rock eventually." "Oh, I never left the area. It's been having too much fun buying up ranch land for pennies on the dollar."
Oh, Murdoch's smile was all teeth and no warmth.
Amazing how accommodating people become. When their cattle start disappearing and their horses throw them at convenient moments. "You killed her father." Proved a point, more like. "But the lovely Miss Thorne here has been surprisingly stubborn about selling. Perhaps watching her new beau die will change her perspective." Thunder shifted beneath Cordelia, and she felt the stallion's muscles coiling for action. The horse knew Murdoch. She could see it in the way his ears flattened against his skull, and his nostrils flared. This was the man who had stolen him from Ryder, the man whose very scent meant pain and captivity. "Easy, boy," she whispered, her hand moving to the knife at her belt. "It wasn't much against rifles, but it was better than nothing." "I do appreciate you bringing my horse back to me," Murdoch continued conversationally. "Thunder will make an excellent addition to my string. Of course, I'll have to break him properly this time. Can't have valuable livestock getting ideas above their station." That was when Thunder exploded. The stallion reared with a scream of pure rage, his hooves striking at the air like weapons. Cordelia clung to his back as he pivoted and launched himself at the canyon wall, his powerful hindquarters bunching as he began to climb the nearly vertical stone face. What the hell? Murdoch's curse was cut short as Thunder's hooves found purchase on a narrow ledge, and the stallion continued his impossible ascent. Rifle shots cracked behind them, but Thunder was already 20 feet up the wall, climbing with the agility of a mountain goat. Cordelia pressed herself flat against his neck, not daring to breathe as they rose higher and higher above the canyon floor.
"Shoot the horse."
Murdoch's voice cracked with panic. "Bring them down." But Thunder had already reached the canyon rim, and with one final surge of power, he hauled himself over the edge and onto solid ground. Below them, Murdoch's men scrambled to find new positions. But they were too late. Thunder was free, and he had no intention of being caged again. Thunder stood on the canyon rim like an avenging angel, his chest heaving and his dark coat gleaming. With sweat behind them, Cordelia could hear shouting and the clatter of boots on stone as Murdoch's men tried to find a way up the sheer canyon wall. But the stallion had chosen his escape route while the cliff face was nearly vertical, with only the narrowest of ledges providing handholds for a desperate horse and rider. "Sweet Jesus," Cordelia breathed, her legs trembling as she slid from Thunder's back. "How did you know he could do that?" Ryder's voice came from behind her, filled with wonder and something deeper. "I didn't." Thunder always was full of surprises. But that shook his head as his bay gelding picked its way carefully up a more conventional trail that led to the rim. That was pure magic. Thunder turned toward the approaching horse and rider, his posture alert but no longer aggressive. When Ryder dismounted and approached slowly, the stallion allowed the cowboy to run his hands over his legs and chest, checking for injuries from the impossible climb. "You magnificent beast," Ryder murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "I thought I'd lost you forever." "You did lose him." Cordelia stepped closer, her heart breaking at the obvious love between man and horse. "And now you've found him again? I suppose congratulations are in order. You won the race and Thunder." Ryder's hands stilled on Thunder's neck. "The race isn't over. Don't be ridiculous. We never made it to Devil's Canyon, much less back to the finish line. And with Murdoch and his men, we're going to finish this." Ryder interrupted, his gray eyes meeting hers with fierce determination. All of it. The race, Murdoch, everything. Below them, Murdoch's voice rose in furious commands as his men spread out to search for another way up. They had maybe 10 minutes before the outlaws found the trail and reached the rim. "Ryder, we need to run. Get back to town. Gather the sheriff. The sheriff's in Murdoch's pocket, same as half the territorial government." Ryder swung back onto his gelding, his jaw set in hard lines. "No, this ends today. Thunder showed us the way out of that trap. Now we're going to use it to set one of our own." "What are you talking about?" "Devil's Canyon. It's the real one, not the tourist spot everyone talks about." He pointed east, toward a series of jagged peaks that rose like broken teeth against the morning sky. "There's a box canyon about 5 miles from here where Apache used to run buffalo herds off the cliffs. If we can lure Murdoch and his men there." Cordelia felt thunder shift beneath her as she remounted. The stallion's ears pricked forward, as if he understood every word. "That's suicide. We'd be trapped just like we were back there. Not if we time it right. There's a narrow trail that leads up the back while Indians used it as an escape route, but the timing has to be perfect." Ryder's smile was sharp as a blade. "Good thing we've got the 2 fastest horses in the territory." The sound of approaching hoofbeats made the decision for them. Murdoch's men had found the trail, and they were coming fast. Thunder danced sideways, eager to run, while Ryder's gelding snorted and pawed the ground. "Together?" Ryder asked, extending his hand toward her. Cordelia looked at his outstretched fingers, knowing that taking them would mean more than just agreeing to his plan. It would mean trusting him completely, binding her fate to his in ways that went far beyond a simple horse. "Race or business partnership?" "Together," she said, clasping his hand firmly. They rode east toward the rising sun. Thunder and the bay gelding running side by side across the prairie with their manes streaming like battle flags. Behind them, Murdoch's gang followed in hot pursuit, their rifle shots growing more distant as the superior horses pulled away. The box canyon appeared ahead of them like a gash in the earth, its red walls rising hundreds of feet into the sky. At its mouth, ancient petroglyphs told stories of hunts and battles, while scattered bones testified to the effectiveness of the Apache hunting strategy. "There." Ryder pointed to a narrow crack in the far wall, barely visible unless you knew where to look. "That's our way out. But we have to make them follow us in first." They slowed their horses to a canter as they entered the canyon, making sure Murdoch's men could see them clearly. The box canyon was perhaps a 1/4 mile long and half as wide, with sheer walls on 3 sides and only the narrow entrance they'd just passed through. "Now what?" Cordelia asked, her voice echoing off the stone walls. "Now we wait," Ryder said, dismounting and pulling a stick of dynamite from his saddlebags. "And hope Thunder's as smart as I think he is." The sound of approaching horses grew louder, and Murdoch's voice carried into the canyon. "Got them trapped now. No way out this time." Ryder lit the fuse and handed the dynamite to Thunder, who took it gently in his teeth as if he'd been trained. For this moment, his entire life. "You know what to do, boy? It's just like the old days." Thunder, actually not adorned, began trotting toward the canyon entrance, the burning fuse held carefully in his mouth. Cordelia watched in amazement as the stallion positioned himself perfectly at the narrowest point of the entrance, then reared up on his hind legs just as Murdoch and his men rode into view. The outlaw leader's eyes went wide as he saw Thunder, silhouetted against the canyon mouth, a stick of dynamite burning in his teeth like some mythical creature from an Apache legend. Son of a Thunder dropped the dynamite at the exact moment he came down on his front hooves, then spun and galloped toward the back wall where Ryder and Cordelia waited. The explosion rocked the canyon, bringing down tons of rock that sealed the entrance completely. When the dust settled, Murdoch and his men were trapped inside, with no way out, except for the narrow Indian trail that led straight up to where the territorial marshal and his deputies waited with shackles and arrest warrants. "How?" Cordelia asked as they rode out of the canyon through the hidden passage. "Sent word to the marshal's office before the race," Ryder explained, his smile triumphant. "Figured if I was going to settle accounts with Murdoch, I might as well do it legal." Been collecting evidence against him for 2 years, enough to hang him twice over. They emerged onto the prairie to find the race officials waiting with a crowd of townspeople who had followed the sound of gunshots and explosions. Judge Morrison sat his horse with his pocket watch still clutched in his weathered hand, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered, as Thunder and the bay gelding approached the impromptu finish line. "Never seen a race quite like that one." "Who won?" called out Jeremiah Polk, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd. Judge Morrison looked from Thunder to the bay gelding, both horses breathing hard, but neither showing signs of defeat. "Near as I can tell, they crossed the canyon rim at exactly the same time. I'd call it a dead heat." "No," Cordelia said quietly, sliding down from Thunder's back. Her legs felt unsteady, but her voice was firm. "Ryder won." The cowboy dismounted and walked toward her, his storm-gray eyes searching her face. "Cordelia, you won," she repeated, louder this time so the crowd could hear. "Thunder chose you back there in the canyon. He knew exactly what you needed him to do, trusted you. Completely. That's not something you can train or force, that's love." Thunder whickered softly and nuzzled her shoulder, as if apologizing for his betrayal. But Cordelia smiled and stroked his neck, her heart breaking and healing at the same time. "It's all right, boy," she whispered. "You belong with him. Can see that now." Ryder stepped closer, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his gray eyes. "What if I don't want to win? What if I want to change the terms of our wager?" "You can't change a bet after it's been made," she said, though her pulse quickened at the hope in his voice. "Then I'm making a new one." He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a leather pouch that clinked with the sound of gold coins. "This should be enough to pay off your ranch and have plenty left over for improvements. It's yours, no strings attached." Cordelia stared at the pouch, her mind reeling. "I don't understand. You won Thunder fair and square. You don't owe me anything." "Owe you everything," Ryder said softly. "You saved his life, gave him a home when he needed one most. More than that. You reminded me what it means to have something worth fighting for besides revenge." The crowd had grown quiet, sensing that something momentous was happening between the two riders. Even Thunder seemed to hold his breath, his dark eyes moving from Cordelia to Ryder and back again. "So what are you proposing?" Cordelia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "A partnership. You, me, and Thunder. We'll run your ranch together, build it into something your father would have been proud of." Ryder's hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "And when the ranch is secure and thriving, maybe we'll follow some trails together as a family. You said men like you don't settle down. I said a lot of things. Turns out I was wrong about most of them." His smile was soft, vulnerable, in a way that made her heart flutter. "Loving someone doesn't make you tame, Cordelia. It makes you stronger. Thunder taught me that, and so did you." She looked into his eyes and saw her future reflected there. Not the lonely struggle she'd imagined, but something bright and wild and wonderful. A life filled with adventure and love, built on the foundation of trust between a woman, a man, and a horse who had brought them together. "Ask me," she said quietly. "Cordelia Thorne," Ryder said, his voice carrying across the prairie like a prayer. "Will you marry me?" "Yes," she breathed, and then louder. "Yes." The crowd erupted in cheers as Ryder swept her into his arms, spinning her around, while Thunder reared and trumpeted his approval. When he finally set her down, both of them were laughing and crying. At the same time, "So what happens now?" she asked, her arms still wrapped around his neck. "Now," Ryder said, pressing his forehead against hers, "we go home. All three of us." Thunder nudged them both with his great head, and Cordelia laughed. As she realized the stallion was demanding his share of attention, she had set out to break a wild horse and ended up finding something infinitely more precious. Love as fierce and free as the prairie wind. And a future that stretched ahead of them like an endless horizon. As they rode back toward Willowbrook, with Thunder running alongside them, no longer needing rope or bridle to keep him close, Cordelia understood at last what her father had tried to teach her. Some things couldn't be broken or tamed. They could only be loved, trusted, and set free to choose their own path. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, they chose to stay. 6 months later, on a spring morning that painted the sky in shades of rose and gold, Cordelia Kavanaugh stood in the doorway of her ranch. Housed their ranch house, watching her husband work with a new colt in the corral. Thunder grazed peacefully in the nearby pasture, no longer the wild, untamable beast who had terrorized half the county but still magnificent in his freedom. The banknote had been paid in full. The ranch was thriving under their joint management. And Vance Murdoch was serving 20 years in the territorial prison. Most importantly, she had found something she'd never dared hope for. A partner who valued her strength instead of trying to diminish it, who challenged her to be better while loving her exactly as she was. "No man can break this stallion," she murmured to herself, smiling as she remembered her foolish declaration all those months ago. She had been right, of course. Thunder had never been broken. He had simply chosen to love, and be loved in return. Just like the cowboy who had captured both their hearts on that fateful sunrise morning when anything had seemed possible. Some stories, Cordelia reflected as she walked out to join her husband and their beloved horse, were worth the risk of everything for the chance at a happy ending.